leadership. And we're going to stop after each of those sections for questions. So it'll probably be easier if we sort of just have those question breaks rather than as we go through, given that we're all virtually connected and we can't all see one another, etc. And I can't see you all, so I don't know if you're all snoring or what you're doing. And Faye's going to help coordinate the questions, which you can ask by chat. If you don't know how to do that, there's a little chat box and you can just ask a question and Faye's going to sort of curate those for me. So, playful leadership. When I go for job interviews and the recruiter says to me, what's your leadership style? I always answer playful. It doesn't always go down well with some people. They go, oh, that's not what we wanted, etc. But in fact, when a recruiter asks you what your style of leadership is, it's actually the wrong question. Because I want to know, when I interview people, is what is their theory of change? When I'm interviewing leaders or managers or people working in the not-for-profit sector, I want to know what they believe causes change, because that's what our jobs are about, creating change. That's what leadership is about, is creating change. So what I want to know is, what is a person's theory of change? That's the number one question. And out of your theory of change should come your leadership style, because your leadership style should in fact reflect what you believe will generate change in people's lives. Now, my theory of change comes from a fellow called Gregory Bateson. He's a very famous psychologist. He was based in Palo Alto in California. And his theory is that change is in response to information that's different. Because Gregory Bateson said, we lived in a world of information and ideas as people. What does that sort of mean? If I've sort of unpacked that a little bit more, it means that people respond to information that they notice and that they believe is different and they believe is achievable. These are all key elements to help people notice change. In the world of information and ideas, we've got all sorts of restraints operating around us that help us, that make us not notice things from time to time. We have to help people notice things that are different. And I'm going to sort of unpack how we do that. A context, for example, can stop people seeing things. So when I used to go and ask ministers in Australia, as political ministers, for money, they would actually expect Gerard Menses, leading big organisations, to come and ask them for money. So any request I made immediately wasn't different. It wasn't anything unexpected. I had to communicate my ask in a way that they felt, oh, that's a bit different. I'm going to pay attention to that. And they also wanted to know that it's going to have an outcome. And that's the same for leaders. That's what we have to do. Now, people are not billiard balls, because Gregory Bateson talked about, we live in the world of information and ideas, and the other world is the world of galaxies and billiard balls. It's the world of cause and effect. And it's really important to understand the difference between these two worlds, particularly as leaders. So in billiard leadership, the world of cause and effect, where A leads to B, you can become a superb billiards player because you can knock a billiard ball and it will go into the side pocket the same time every time because you've hit the right angle of incidence. Everything is real, it's fixed. A billiard ball is a billiard ball is a billiard ball. But in the world of people, things are socially constructed. It all depends on the context and what you are, how you interpret things. A billiard ball will be a billiard ball no matter where it is. If I do this, what I'm doing now, talking to you all over the internet, talking about these things, you go, oh, what a wise person this is. If I was to wander out into the middle of my street and do exactly the same thing, talk exactly the same way, people would think, oh, this guy's a little strange. What's he doing talking to himself? Our context will interpret things. In the world of billiard balls, it's cause and effect. A leads to B. In the world of you and I, the world of information and ideas, it's not about cause and effect. If I was to punch Sean Lyons in the shoulder, he's not going to bounce off at an angle of incidence and go out his study door. He's going to interpret what I've done. He's going to say, oh, Gerard is male bonding. Yes, that's wonderful. Or he's going to say, Gerard's a bit nervous. Or he's going to say, Gerard's harassing me. Or he's going to say, Gerard's having a psychotic breakdown. He's going to choose to interpret what I've done and choose a response. And that's really, really important to remember. I haven't caused him to do anything. He has interpreted what I've done and he's chosen to do something. He's noticed something different and he's responding to it. In billiard leadership, it's often about just focusing on the problem and fixing the deficit. In people leadership, it's really about strength. We want to really celebrate and identify the strength that people have. We want to have a solution focus. In fact, I believe that every piece of human behaviour, every office behaviour, every work behaviour is actually that employee, that person offering up a solution. Might not be a solution that works. It might not actually be a solution to the problem that we're dealing with, but it's their way of trying to communicate. When I used to work with people who were non-verbal and they kicked and they bit and they spat, that was them trying to communicate. They were offering a solution. And of course, we saw it as a problem. But when you started to understand, hang on, they're trying to tell you something, you actually made a lot more progress. It's having a solution focus. I'm a very positive person. I even see the hangover as a solution. A hangover is a solution because it's telling me that I've stopped drinking. It's the pain of a solution. And if I can work through that pain, I'll weed myself off alcohol altogether. In billiard leadership, management's sort of the elite. We've got special knowledge and truth. But in people leadership, where we're celebrating the resourcefulness and strength of the people we're working to, we understand that we have no special truth. We do have skills. We've got facilitating skills. We help people find their ideas, but there's no necessarily one right answer to everything. We can work together as a team. And in fact, what we want to do is we want to promote personal responsibility because we understand that people are choosing to respond in certain ways. They are taking responsibility for their action. I haven't caused them to do anything. It's about creating cooperation, collaboration. That's the way we want to work. Whereas in billiard leadership, it's often about, well, you do what I say. You just can't get dedicated staff anymore. If you did what I told you to do, we'd not be in the problem that we're in now. And that often leads us to thinking, actually, it's the person that's the problem. You know, Gerard never listens to me. And because he never listens to me, we never get things done. Whereas in a socially created world, I'm starting to look at and say, okay, actually, is the way I'm communicating effective? Are the systems that we've got set up in this office working for us? Is our understanding of change the right way to do things? And I'm trying to look at outside. It's actually not the individual that's the problem, it's how we're working together and communicating. Now, you can really know when you get seduced into the world of billiard ball leadership as opposed to the world of people leadership, because we get confused between these two worlds all the time. In the world of billiard balls, nothing leads to nothing. If you don't touch the billiard ball will do nothing. But in the world of information and ideas, the world that you and I live in, nothing is a piece of information. And it is therefore, in fact, something. And when you're a leader and you say, oh, I don't know what to do, I'll do nothing. In fact, you're doing something. You're sending a message to the organisation. They might say, oh, Gerard, we've heard nothing from him. He just doesn't know what he's doing at the moment. That's scary. Or they might say, oh, look, she's doing nothing at the moment. She's actually really confident. It's okay. They're going to interpret it. They'll fill the void in. Nothing is the Valentine's Day that never came, the dinner invitation that never came. Very powerful piece of information. So when we say, I'm going to do nothing, something will happen. And when you think nothing will happen, you've jumped out of the world of information and ideas into the world of billiard balls, and you're in the wrong area of leadership to create change. Now, my theory of change is based on being in the world of information and ideas. You might have a different theory of change. There's no one right theory, but you should all be able to articulate for yourselves. And in fact, it's a question that I would ask you in any job interview is, what do you believe generates change? In the organisation that you work in, are you able to articulate what will produce the desired outcome? What will create the social change that you want to create in the world around you? What is your scaling engine? How will you grow? Because, you know, we need to grow our organisations to respond to the need and demand that is there. So what will make our organisation grow? What are the things that we can do to help it grow and at the same time achieve the outcome that we want to achieve? So that's what a theory of change is. A theory of change is what creates change, what creates growth, what creates difference, what creates a better performance in the people that I'm working with. And there should be a consistency across those questions in your mind. It might just be a process. It might just be a technique. It might be a very sophisticated theory. There's no one right answer, but you should have one. And if you come to me and say, well, I'm eclectic, I will ask you then, okay, well, what's your meta theory? How do you choose which technique to work in which circumstance? You want to get back to that basic thing. What is it that generates change? So any questions so far? There's a lot of information there in a very short period of time. But that's laying the foundation that you'll now understand why I use playful leadership. And I use the science of this theory of change to create a playful leadership that gets the best response from people. Faye, are there any questions?
No, we haven't had any come in via the chat, so please do. We invite everybody to jump in via the chat and submit any questions that you have. But Gerard, one thing I was just thinking about there when you were talking about when you have quite a large team and quite a diverse team, particularly a culturally diverse team, and you've got conflicting ideas on a process coming, that different people are putting forward in a non-billiard style of leadership. How do you bring the cats together? How do you herd the cats?
Okay, Faye. Well, that's actually what I'm just about to go on and talk about. So that's a very prescient question. And maybe I'll answer that by going into the next section.
All right, cool. Well, just before we do so, we've also got a couple of from Jeanette. She would like to know about change growth and what was the third thing. So in your previous slide.
So what will produce the desired outcome? So you should be able to articulate what will make people buy your product, what will make homeless people homed, what will make unemployed people employed, what will help break the domestic violence cycle, what will help break a dependency cycle, what will we do to create a fairer society? These are things that depending on the focus of your organisation or business, you need to be able to answer. And the third thing was, what is your scaling engine? If you're a leader in the organisation, you've got a responsibility to help the organisation grow, which I know is a controversial thing in some quarters, but we do need to grow because we're not meeting need, we're not responding to things. And if we're a for-profit organisation, of course we want to grow to generate additional profit. And now we're all coming out of COVID. We actually need to grow because we're going to have to sort of get this economy back again. We're going to have to get people back to work again. We're going to have to reach out with a different way of thinking. So how do we scale up the work that we do? That's the scaling engine. That's what it is. And it revolves around innovation. And that's a whole nother, I've got to say, that's a whole other talk about how you create an innovative organisation. But innovation and scaling are sort of very closely related. So that's, yes, that's a different topic. I won't go down that path just yet.
Good as gold. Sounds good.
Okay, so I was just saying your leadership style should be based on your theory of change, and my leadership style is playful leadership. It's about fun. It's about helping people notice things, because they expect CEOs to be pretty somber. They expect CEOs to be pretty tough sometimes. And so if I can be a bit playful and a bit different, people will enjoy working with me and they will notice and listen to the things that I have to say. There are 5 key elements of playful leadership, and I'm going to work through these elements one at a time. But firstly, I'll just give you a quick overview. Playful leadership, and this is the herding cats question, Faye, is trying to create a purposeful and achievable context for the organisation and the people that I work with. It's about understanding the difference between blessedness and happiness, and I'll unpack that in a little while. It's about creating hope and belief. It's not necessarily about motivating people. So it's creating a purposeful and achievable context that people identify with and believe can happen. It's about generating conversations of possibility with your staff. Remember, it's not about telling them things, it's about actually having a conversation. And we're going to understand that in fact there's no such thing as resistance. In brilliant leadership, people resist their leader. In people leadership, they're cooperating as hard as they can. It's about how we create a belief that change is possible. That's what we have to do as leaders. We're advocates, if you like, and the best advocacy is in fact a well thought out question. And we're going to explore that in great detail at the end. I'm going to give you some input about how to ask questions to help people discover change. And the best advocate, of course, is delightful. If the political minister says, oh, here comes Gerard again to ask for money, we're not looking forward to that, I'm behind the eightful. Where if he's going, oh, Gerard's coming to see me, he's an interesting character, we'll have a good conversation, I've got a better chance of getting an outcome. If the staff look forward to my weekly communication to them, they're more likely to read it. If it's boring and it's the same old thing, they're going to ignore it. If they think the CEO is dull as ditch water, they're not going to listen. So I need to be delightful. I've got to make sure that I maintain delightfulness. And sometimes you can run out of delightfulness and then it's time to move on. It's about humour, because I think humour is a great way to be delightful. It's about telling stories, building a narrative with the people that you're working with. So purposeful and achievable context, a conversation of possibility, great questions, being delightful and having a bit of fun creates playful leadership, and a leadership that will generate great change and bring together multidisciplinary teams into a combined focus. So let's start. Hope, belief, purpose. It's not motivation. A wonderful quote that in fact I discovered at a Grow conference in New Zealand. I don't know the woman who shared this quote, but I've stolen it. It wasn't hers. She stole it from someone else. If you want to build a boat, don't drum up the men and women to gather wood or divide up work and give orders. Instead, get them all to yearn for the endless sea. That's what I want to do as a leader, is I want my staff to yearn for the endless sea. I want them to yearn for a socially just world. I want them to yearn for a very effective organisation. I have to be visionary, but I've got to make sure that the vision that I put forward is achievable in the eyes of people. I'm not a great fan of big, hairy, audacious goals because I don't think people believe that they're actually real. I want people to believe that what we're doing is real and can happen. There's now a lot of research. I always used to talk about the difference between happiness and blessedness. You know, I didn't want a happy office. I didn't want a happy team, because happiness was like a here and now concept. You're either happy or you're not. Whereas blessedness is this long-term concept that allows for pain, because there's always pain when we work together. It allows us to work through things. Just because something's uncomfortable, like a hangover, doesn't mean it's a problem. It's actually often part of a solution. Change leads to hangover. Change leads to pain. And in that pain, I'm not happy. So I need to understand a bigger picture. And that's the notion I have of blessedness, which is sort of a biblical notion. You know, I have to be sure that you're blessed. It's sort of past, present, and future. But now there's a lot of psychological research, and they're talking about hedonia versus eudaimonia, or hedonism versus purpose, which is the same concept as this happiness and blessedness. And they're actually saying a purposeful organisation actually gets better outcomes than a happy organisation. But you need a degree of happiness. You need a balance between these things. And it's about managing for purpose. So how do we create that purpose and that achievableness? So I used to run Make-A-Wish in Australia for a little while there, and we're an international organisation, and our vision and mission came down from America. And the vision was that every eligible child shall receive a wish. Well, what does that mean? It's not very clear. Make-A-Wish works with children who've got a life-threatening medical condition. And what we're actually really trying to do is to build the resilience of those children so that they can overcome their life-threatening condition. People don't understand that that's the nature of our work. It's an organisation that often thought we were too beautiful to be taken seriously. And I discovered that the people in Australia didn't actually believe that we could reach every particular child who had a life-threatening medical condition. In fact, we didn't even know how many children in Australia had a life-threatening medical condition. So my job as a leader was to start to focus them. And Make-A-Wish is just a wonderful organisation because it's got such a narrow focus. It's a fantastic organisation to practice management theory with. And it was very, very simple. We discovered that, in fact, there were 7,500 children in Australia with a life-threatening medical condition at any one time. And 500 of those children died each year. So we had time to get to all those children. And if we did 2,000 great wishes a year, we could cover in 4 years everyone with a life-threatening medical condition. And then we would be off and running because, in fact, there were 2,000 children diagnosed with a life-threatening medical condition every year in Australia. It's just a matter of doing some research. And it became a concrete target that what people believed was actually possible. Initially they went, how can we do 2,000 wishes a year? Because we're in fact only doing 200. And there was no ambition to do any more, whereas I'm always ambitious for change and growth. And when we discovered the real demand, within a period of 18 months, the team was actually doing 1,500 wishes a year. We still are on the journey to get to 2,000 wishes a year, but we believe it's achievable and we can do it. I'm no longer involved with the organisation. It's not a stretch target. It's not a bold goal. It's not a hairy, audacious goal. It's a realistic and inspiring target. 2,000 great wishes. That's what we focused on. That was what was achievable. Now, if you've got a multidisciplinary team, if you've got a bigger organisation, so I used to run Vison Australia, which had sort of about 1,500 staff, all different disciplines, many, many different approaches to change, psychologists, social workers, orientation mobility. There were fundraisers, of course. There were people who were expert in technology, many, many different views of the world. And in fact, we were 8 different organisations because we merged over a period of 2 years 8 different blindness organisations. And each blindness organisation had a different belief about what created change. They had a different belief about what created outcomes. Some were very welfare orientated and quite bolshy. Others were very sort of patronising and conservative, if you like. Some were quite socially justice focused. So a broad range of cultures and views. So it was really important to bring them together. And we wrote the vision together. People who are blind will be able to participate in every aspect of life. And again, that's a wonderful visionary goal, but often a lot of people actually didn't believe it was achievable. 97% of people who are blind are actually unemployed. How do we generate change? So I wanted to make sure the organisation was focused on the things that would create the change. The biggest barrier to access for people who are blind is the lack of access to information. And hey, we were 8 organisations coming together, so we should be really good at information management and sharing. If people who are blind need to participate in every part of life, we need to be really good at problem solving. How do you work out the colour of your clothes? How do you match your socks in the morning? How do you cook? We've got to solve those problems for people and solve them with people. And hey, isn't that the type of can-do organisation we want to be? Once we've solved the problem, we ought to be really good at training. So we really need to train the solutions and help people discover them. And again, isn't that the type of the organisation we want to be, where we train and develop our own staff? And finally, if we want people to participate in every aspect of life, that's about access. So we should be really good at creating access and understanding what it means and what stops access. And hey, isn't that the type of organisation we want to be, where we work together and inclusive and bring people in? And that became IPTA, Information, Problem Solving, Training and Access. And it sounds crazy, but the staff loved it because they had 4 things to focus on. And if we focused our work on being great at information, being great at problem solving, being great at training and great at access, we achieved fantastic outcomes for people who are blind or have low vision. And in fact, we increased the reach of our services. Our satisfaction rates from our clients skyrocketed. They went up into the high 90s from the 70s and stayed there. So we had a purposeful and achievable context. People could believe that we could become good at these things. So a playful leader is trying to create a purposeful and achievable context consistent with the theory of change. It can happen. So the next part of playful leadership is having a conversation of possibility, because it's about questioning, it's about converting, it's about creating consensus within the organisation. So the key things there is, I've learnt that there's no such thing as resistance. if I'm looking at everyone throwing up behaviour as a solution, then I really understand this. When I used to teach family therapy to people, we used to do this role play. And at the end of the role play, everyone would be debriefing, and because we were all psychologists and social workers, we all said, oh, this person was resistant to that, this person was resistant to this. And then we got them to read out the behavioural directive that we had given everyone. And we'd given everyone exactly the same behavioural directive, which was cooperate as hard as you can. And everyone looked and they said, how could you were resisting? You were supposed to be cooperating. They were cooperating as hard as they can around what they believed to be the solution. So the parents in the session, were cooperating as hard as they can by trying to get the therapist to understand how bad their children were, because until the therapist understood how bad their children were, we weren't going to get change. And the therapist was often going, until the parents can see that there's some good in their children, we're not going to get anywhere. So they're immediately on a collision course. They're both cooperating as hard as they can, but they're on a collision course. They're cooperating what they think is a solution. When I ran the Endeavour Foundation in Australia, it was an organisation for people with intellectual disability. It was started by parents for their children. And what those parents were trying to do was to create a safe and secure environment for their children to become adults and have a safe and secure life. And so they created accommodation services, employment services, day services, anything that their children would need, they wanted to make sure that Endeavour could provide it. Wonderful vision. You absolutely make sense of that. Government created a disability policy that said no one organisation should control every aspect of a person with disability's life. That's a great vision too. You can well understand that, because what we celebrate is choice within life. And of course, Endeavour and the government immediately became at loggerheads to one another. Yet both organisations had a valid reason for believing what they believed. And they were cooperating as hard as they could with each other about what they believed was the best outcome for people with disability. And my job was to broker a dialogue between government and that organisation to create change on both sides so that we could get a better outcome. And if you accept that all your staff are in fact cooperating as hard as they can, it becomes much easier to ask them questions. If they're resisting, you end up having a fight with them. But if you know that they're cooperating as hard as they can, you start to think, oh, what is it that I've not understood? What are you afraid will happen if we do this? What do you think might be the negative outcome for a person with disability if we do this? And in the not-for-profit world, our staff are absolutely focused on getting the best outcome for the people that they work with. And they know better than you and I about how to get that outcome. And they will subvert any policy, any process, anything that they don't think is in the best interest of that person, which is exactly the type of stuff that we want. So we have to recognise that they're cooperating with us and celebrate that. We have to create a belief that change is possible. Often in the not-for-profit sector, we want to cure homelessness. We want to fix drug addiction. Fantastic. But deep in our hearts, we want the organisation to go out of business, but we don't think it ever will, because we don't really think the problem can be solved completely. And often people get into difficulty when a problem is articulated in such a way that it's not seen as solvable. So I learned as a therapist, for example, if I was working with someone who was a schizophrenic, often people believed schizophrenia wasn't a solvable problem. But if I could work with someone who paid too much attention to other people's thoughts, then change suddenly became possible. Just reframing the definition of the problem can actually make a huge difference. I didn't deal with obsessive compulsive people. I dealt with people who were over careful. I didn't deal with multi-problem families. I tried to take all the problems and identify it as one core issue that they believed was changeable. Every eligible child receives a wish. Oh, we're not going to get to every eligible child. 2,000 wishes a year. Yes, we can do that. That's achievable. The other thing to listen to in when you do a change exercise, you want to create belief, is I rejoice when the staff tell me, oh, we did this last time. We've done this before. That's fantastic. If your staff are telling you that they're cooperating as hard as they can, and you need to respond about saying, oh, well, what did we learn last time? Why didn't it work last time? How will it be different this time? And you shouldn't do a strategic plan with your staff or set out on one unless they believe it's different to the last one. because the last one didn't work, or if it did, how's it better than the last one so that we'll get a better outcome? If you're working with children in foster care, for example, and I used to work with children who had multiple foster care placements, the number one thing was they had to believe the next placement was different to the last one. If they didn't think it was different to the last one, it was going to have the same bad outcome. When children change schools, when anyone does anything different, they have to believe this has got to be better or different to the last time I did it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. The best advocacy is a well thought out question. And I'm going to finish up this session about taking you through some exercises about question. But delightful and humour and stories. If it's not fun, it's not done. Do people look forward to you coming? As I said, we really need to be fresh and energetic as leaders in the organisations that we work with, in the teams that we run. The team will draw their energy from us. They will take their lead from us. If we're tired and grumpy, so will the team be. And yes, it's hard being a leader and you are tired, but I've learned that you can be tired and delightful. You can be tired and intelligent. You can be tired and focused. Okay, it's okay to own that tiredness, but I'm leading. So I'm going to be tired and a leader, and a joyful one, a happy one. The politicians want to talk to your organisation. It might be that they're afraid of the problem. How can you engage with them? You know, at the moment with COVID-19, we're all learning that businesses need to keep engaged with everyone while they're shut in their houses, etc. That's the same for us. We need to be engaging our staff, COVID-19 or not COVID-19. We need to be constantly engaging with our staff. Is your brand engaging with your staff? How are you communicating with your staff? Are they getting regular updates about what's happening in the organisation? Do they know what the progress is that you're making towards the outcome that you want to achieve? And it's the way that you're communicating that fresh, different, and relevant. And a great test is, you know, when you write something, you say, well, how would you read this? It's when you actually take off a solution-focused hat and put a problem-focused hat on and try and read it in the most negative way possible. And then you sort of reshape the communication so it remains fresh, relevant, and lively. Humour and delight. I can't stress the importance of that for leadership and driving and generating energy in your organisation. So any questions so far on how I've started to unpack that theory of change and start to bring the cats together into a way that will create further change? And then the next session we're going to concentrate on is actually how to ask questions, how to advocate with that well thought out question.
Great, thanks, Gerard. As I've said, everyone, please fire through your questions via the chat. What I did have, Gerard, was just thinking about the creating conversations. When I've been in organisations, I've always thought of when setting up particular goals, particularly, you know, you talk about making sure they're achievable and relevant, is using the SMART formula, being specific, measurable, applicable, you know, applicable, relevant, and also time-bound. So those are obviously a big part of exactly what you've been talking about as well. And it's trying to, I don't know, share the humour within those, or build a story around them that will bring your team in with you.
That's right. There are many things that you need to do to help, you know, reinforce the story that you make. And measures are one of them. Measures actually drives behaviour in an organisation. I don't know if you know the story of I better not say the name, but a pizza chain in America promised you would get your pizza within 20 minutes or it was free. And they had to abandon that because they were measuring their staff on the speed of delivery, and they killed 28 pedestrians.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Oh, that's grim.
And whereas if you actually measured your staff on the accuracy of delivery and the heat of the pizza and some other things, you get different behaviours. So the way you measure something will drive behaviour. And that's why that SMART measurement that you talked about is so important. I like SCORE, where the O is actually observable, because sometimes in our sector, people believe that some change is not measurable, and it is difficult to measure some change, but it's observable. There are things that we can observe. There are behaviours that we can observe. I love working with a tool called the Outcome Star. It's a great way to generate observable change and to create a conversation of possibility, in fact, with the very people that you're working with. And it develops a series of parameters in which it helps those people notice change, because that's the other thing you're trying to do as a leader, is to help people notice change. If they don't think change is happening, then nothing goes wrong. You get nowhere. And that's why the SMART approach is really important, because people go, oh yeah, well, we actually are 10% better than last month. We've actually achieved something and done something. And that reinforces the belief that we can move forward. Right. So you need to have those different overlays, absolutely.
Cool. Celia has asked the question, in overcoming resistance, how much does a leader become a mediator?
Well, firstly, Celia, I'm going to be, very provocative and say, well, you're not overcoming resistance because the resistance isn't there. That person is cooperating, and you really have to. It's a discipline. I have to tell you, it's a hard discipline, because even I have been doing this for a long time. Still, every now and then, go, oh, it's a resistant person. No, that's the wrong approach. And it's not about overcoming it, because it's not about me winning. It's about me collaborating with that person. It's about me having that conversation of possibility. So it's me then trying to understand their belief. And it's not necessarily about mediation, but it can be. And certainly leaders mold consensus. Consensus just doesn't happen. That's what we do. We have to build and create that consensus. How do we generate that consensus? Is by asking questions. And I think to challenge the overcome word even further, sometimes it's very powerful of us as leaders is to go what's called like a one down position, to not assert our authority over someone, but go, oh, what is it that I've not understood? So immediately I'm, elevating that other person. I'm giving that person power that they already have. I'm not asserting an authority over them. I'm not turning it into a fight. Where do you think we're going wrong here? I'm not sure that I understand the problem. Tell me what you believe the problem to be. What's the point that I've missed? So you put it back onto yourself a little bit. And that's when a conversation will occur. Whereas if I'm just trying to overcome resistance, what I'm then often doing is I'm listening to that person for the weakness in their argument. I'm listening to the thing that they don't understand. And then they will work harder to remain in that position, if that makes sense. So that might segue then into in fact, the exercise of how to ask questions, because that's really what I think is key to being a leader and key to this whole notion of playful leadership. So I just want to give you a few simple tools about that. You certainly want to coach by being delightful, confident, and appreciative. And the best way to do that with questions is to avoid asking why, or to avoid asking can. Often people freeze up. Why did you do that? Even if it's not used in that tone. Now, I know there'll be other people that will talk very, very hard in brand, etc. about you and your organisation must understand your why. And I think that's very important. This is a whole different why than that. What is the why of what we do? That's an okay question, but see how I asked it. What is the why? Whereas if I just simply say, why do you do that? It's much more threatening for people, and they freeze up. And when they freeze up, they often, can't find an answer or can't have a conversation. What do you think will lead to change? How do you think we can get there? Again, if you say, can we get there? It often creates sort of a negativity, if you like. So very simple rule. And this is, a really oversimplification, but it's a good way to start. Avoid why and can. Focus on what and how when you phrase a question. It's much less confrontational for people. And I'll talk about some other ways to avoid that confrontation. Be focused. You are building a context. Remember, people leadership was about creating that was socially constructed. We created reality together. It wasn't cause and effect. So we need to then create that reality in the way that we communicate and ask questions. So for example, I always know if I'm seeing a bad counsellor if the first question they ask me is, how do you think things have been going? Because I'm living in a world of information ideas, and because I'm a problem, I've actually often got a problem focus. I want to make sure that people are always having a solution focus, and it needs coaching on that, because we do live in a problem focused world. The media is so negative, they don't want to talk about good news stories, they only want to talk about problems. You know, and a lot of organisations will only talk about problems. You go to the board meeting, we're 10% behind budget, Gerard. How are we going to fix that? Blah, 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 you know. What we need to do is, and if you ask people how things have been going, they will default usually to the negative. Oh, you know, things haven't changed that much. They don't necessarily notice the change. And this is what happens with our staff. That's why the measures are really important. We want them to believe that we're making progress. And it's really hard. If you're doing things day to day, you often don't notice the change. That's one of the things that stops people noticing change. You've all heard the story, you can put a frog into a beaker of water, bring it slowly to the boil, and the frog never jumps out because it doesn't notice, it becomes habituated. And it's called the boiling frog syndrome. You know, why would you live in a war-torn city, for example? Because it's gradually built up and we don't notice. Drop the frog in boiling water, jump straight out. Same thing, you ask people how things are going, you'll get a negative story. Rather focus, your questions need to focus. Where do you believe we made the most progress? What did you learn today? There's a wonderful story about a hospital in India that has grown its business by 100% in 5 years by just asking every day, every staff member, what did you learn today? And that's how they drive innovation in their organisation. And it helps people focus on positive things. It helps people focus on difference, because remember, change is in response to noticing difference. So I need to help people notice difference. Talk to me about a time when you thought the strategic plan was wrong. What convinced you to keep going is often a good one with managers who are sort of struggling, or you want them to identify on what are the things that are going to create the scarring, etc. So your question should be focused. You should always start a meeting, and you can only have a plan for the first 10 minutes in a meeting with things that are going to focus on it. You know, where do you think we've made the most progress, and what do you think drove that progress? Where do you think our communication has been most successful with our staff? And what do you think they've noticed, etc., etc. So you're wanting to make questions of discovery. It doesn't mean that you don't ask hard questions. You know, sometimes when, okay, so we seem to be losing money. What do you think is the cause of us losing money? What's the major contribution to it? That's okay to ask that question, but you're focusing absolutely on where you want to get a change and solution. Again, it's about noticing difference. And so there's a technique that I use called double description. I want people to notice something, and often if you only talk about one side of something, it doesn't have an impact. If you only talk about risk, and a lot of boards these days only focus on risk, and it's all about compliance, etc. And you probably have this experience in your own organisation, but there's no reward without risk, and you need to balance the two. So you have to. When you talk about risk, you must always talk about reward. When you talk about reward, you must always talk about risk. That's the way that you're going to create a better strategic plan. And you can have questions about what are the risks, well, what are the rewards? You balance the negative with the positive. And out of that, you start to see a difference. And you have an equation that says, actually, that's not worth taking the risk to do that, or that is worth taking the risk to do that, and we're going to do it. And you're not going to be punished because the risk came true. What are the advantages and disadvantages of something? Don't just talk about what are the advantages, always talk about the disadvantage as well. And ditto, don't just talk about the disadvantage, always talk about the advantage as well. Put the two together side by side. Collapsing time is another way to help people notice difference. Well, what do you think is the difference between now and the organisation 6 months ago? What do you think we're doing differently? What are the good things? What are the bad things? It's okay to ask that again to get that double description. It's very, very good when you're having conversations of possibility and people perhaps are struggling, is to externalize things or objectify things. You know, people have got powerful belief systems in their head about what's right and what's going to work. And it's very important in any social organisation that your staff are able to articulate the process, articulate the things that will lead to change. You want to change the outcome, you've got to change the process. if you keep doing the same process, you'll get the same outcome. So it's a great thing to try and get the process, or what are the steps that we do to do this, onto a whiteboard or onto a piece of paper or onto a virtual screen, and it actually takes it out of people's head. And you actually have a much more constructive discussion about change, because you're suddenly not talking about the person, it's there on a piece of paper. When I work with boards, I sort of say, where do you think we sit on the strategic continuum? How do we make decisions? And I have a much better discussion with them, because what I do is I take their belief systems from inside their head, externalize them onto a piece of paper, and it's a much more objective, calm discussion rather than one, I'm right and you're wrong. Because in our sector, we are right. We know, we are passionate about what we do. We're passionate about our causes, and we have to get beyond people's passion to understanding the process behind that passion, and that's where we'll get the change. So externalize it, Show me the way that this works. Describe how you think people experience our service, etc., etc. Are ways to start to get that process out of people's head onto a way that it can be objectified. And it's not about them, it's about the process. It's about generating outside. So again, there's no such resistance. They're cooperating as hard as they can. We've talked a little bit about this. What do I understand? What do you believe will bring success? What are you concerned our clients will lose if we do this policy? What do you believe is the key to our success? What do you most value about what it is that we do? These are all wonderful questions to create change in the organisation and help people going. To ensure it's different, what do you think stopped us succeeding last time? What should we do differently this time? What would show you that we succeeded this time? That's a very, very powerful question. What is success to you? What do we need to do to succeed? And I've got a whole lot of list of questions here. And I think Faye is going to send these to you. I'm not sure.
Yes.
You don't have to sort of scribble them all down at once. And they're just sort of thought starters for you. These are questions for working with people, at difficult times. What do you most want to tell me? This is actually a list of questions that I use when I start with an organisation as a CEO, and I sit down with each board member one by one and each senior team member one by one. And this is how I orientate myself. What is it that you most want to tell me? And it's amazing what comes out. What is success for you? How do you know when we're succeeding as an organisation? What is the outcome that our stakeholders most want? Very important question for people to be able to articulate so you get your plan right. How will you know when we're there? A lot of people can't answer that question. What's the first sign of success? Often we rush into things, but we don't recognise what the first step is going to be. We don't notice we've taken that first step, and we don't believe we've made any change. So what's the first sign of success? What are you most concerned about? A whole lot of things there. You can see their what, how, their which, they're objective, they're not threatening questions, they generate a conversation, a possibility. So we've got 10 minutes to go, so I should stop there and ask, do you have any other questions? Just quickly, one of the key things that I do ask, it's big up there, what do you not want me to change? That's actually a very potent question to ask when you come into a team. What is it that you don't want me to change? Because that's actually going to give you a lot of information about the beliefs and what's important and what's core to people. And so you can make sure that you are indeed cooperating as hard as you can with them.
Great. Good stuff. Great stuff. Great stuff. Again, people, please fire through your questions. Yeah, I mean, for me just then, certainly, what's the first sign of success? When I think of the different leadership roles that I've had, Gerard, certainly in projects that I've managed, there have been times when I haven't set down what's our first success measure going to look like. How's that actually going to see? And you're right, you get sort of a time frame into the project, say 3 months into the project, and you think, oh, nothing's working, whoa, and you go off on a tangent. And yeah, when you don't know what your first sign of success is going to look like, then it can be hard to recognise it and to set a time frame to celebrate it and celebrate it with your team.
And it's a really important one for a leader when you start as an organisation is to ask yourself, what's going to be the first sign of success for me here? so that I know what I'm doing, you know. And often first sign of success for me will be people asking questions, people responding, because I always do, because I've run fairly large organisations dispersed across Australia and New Zealand. I've done a weekly email because I can't get to every office all the time. And a first sign of success is me is people responding to the email going, just thank you, Gerard, or that's rubbish, we've heard that before. That's fantastic as far as I'm concerned. Try and get that engagement going. So that's often a first sign for me. And again, you know, if I'm going into an organisation that's really in trouble, and I've gone into organisations, you know, I ran one organisation that had spent all its reserves. It was a huge organisation, only had 2.5 weeks cash flow left. You know, and everyone was panicking. So it was very, very important to get everyone focused on, okay, well, what's the first sign that we're starting to turn the corner? And that was also, again, getting people to that point of what's achievable. You know, that, oh, we can do that, yes. So that's good, we can start to change. Again, it's reinforcing that we can change.
Yeah, absolutely. We have had a question come in from Linda. What would you advise if things have gone wrong in your team under your leadership, resulting in conflict, loss of trust, and staff undermining the leaders? How can it be redirected?
Well, I think that's a very important one where you really have to, you know, go one down with that team. I would have a series of one-on-one conversations. One of the things often is if things are quite negative, it's very hard to change a group. And, you know, one person might be reasonable and another person might be very, very angry and, you know, come into the meeting with, you know, we're not going to let Gerard pull the wool over our eyes, and they're going to cooperate as hard as they can about that solution. So they're not going to budge an inch to whatever I say, and other people in the team might start to budge, but that person won't, because that's what they believe the solution is. And so no one budges, and it makes things harder. So I will then, in those very difficult things when things aren't working well, I will have one-on-one conversations with people. They're more likely to open up. What I will then do is I will feed back the results of that. I'll certainly talk to people and say, look, I'm going to feed this back to the whole team. And I then come back to the team and saying, well, what you've said is, we don't understand this. I'm not communicating, or this is where I need to change. You know, you'll actually come back with some solutions that they've offered. And then then you can say, and now I need you too, because I think this is where we've misunderstood one another. You're trying to get it, you don't want to get into guilt and blame. You want to say, this is where the process has worked against us, or this is where the past history of the organisation has influenced to believe this, you know. And then it's getting them to focus on change too. Okay, so there are 3 things we're going to work on, or 2 things we're going to work on. So you don't want a list of 10 problems. You can say, look, you've come up with a list of 10 problems, but we're going to work on these 2. Because these 2 seem the most important to people. Are they the most important to people? And you want to get buy-in from them. You want to get support from them. This is how we're building consensus. We can't do all 10 at once. We're going to work on these 2. What do you think will be the result of us just focusing on those 2? What will you notice? What do I need to do differently? What do you need to do differently? So you want to get focused on the solution. You know, it's not necessarily about why we're in the place that we're in now. You know, a fire can start in the house, it can start in the bedroom, but it take over the whole house. You don't put the fire out by just putting water on in the bedroom. The problem has now become consumed. You've got to deal with the situation that you're in now. The past isn't necessarily relevant, but my belief in the future is. So it's unlocking that. So one-on-one conversations with people, taking that feedback, giving it back to everyone so they all feel part of the conversation, that they've all heard things, there aren't secrets. You're trying to make the covert overt. If you just have one-on-ones and don't share it with people, that's just going to reinforce the behaviour. You being one down in that process, you know, you're willing to you're taking responsibility as a leader, but then inviting them to take responsibility too. Like, you know, there's a part for them to play, and then focusing on just, you know, 2 or 3 things that you're going to focus on to drive the change.
Super. We have got a question from Andrew and also from Sean Lyons. I'll jump in first with Andrew's question because we are almost coming up to time. So Andrew's question is, how do you begin to change from this is how we do things here mindset, so all about organisational culture, if it's not broken, don't fix it?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Yeah, this is how we do things here. I've certainly encountered that in many organisations, and that was the story at Vison Australia, where we had 8 different blindness organisations, and this is how we did things here. And in the not-for-profit sector in particular, every organisation started because no one else was doing it properly. And we have to understand that. So that's why we're so bad at merging together. So what's brought you success over the years? What is it that you think about the way that you do things here that creates the most success? You know, it's like, don't swim against the rip, you're swimming with it. And you're getting the person to unpack and talk about that success. And so the key success elements in how you've done things are, and then you start to reframe those elements. So if we could do a little bit more of that, or we could tweak that, we might even get a different result. You know, we might even be able to create more change. Yeah. So you invited them on this journey of discovery with them. So again, it's having that conversation, absolutely being appreciative of what they're doing and celebrating that fact. You don't want to resist it yourself. You don't want to get in a fight with it. You want to go with it. And get down to the bottom of it. And that's how you start to generate the change. And it's not tackling on if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, that's the scaling engine. Look, you know, we're working well. How do we work weller? But you know, what are you worried about if we do some more stuff? What are you worried that we might unhinge? You know, what do we need to protect? What do we need to protect if we do anything differently?
Yeah, which leads us back to, as you've got in your questions, what do you not want me to change?
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Just jumping in, questions. Sean's one was about the importance of brand at a time when many established brands are challenged. Isn't that fear rather than resistance?
Look, I think brand is really important, and I know where the not-for-profit sector in both Australia and New Zealand is becoming far more commercial, and we're talking about brand. And I know I've seen so many times when we're asking our staff to be brand ambassadors, and I keep working with CEOs and marketing people and go, no, we're not interested in the brand, we're interested in the mission. We need to be mission ambassadors. And I think often, but I use brand. Brand is actually a way, it's like personality. They say personality is your bubble to create survival for yourself. Brand is often more important internally to the staff. You know, that's what they understand. The brand is the why of what we do. And that's where you start to get into that. So when I do brand work with organisations, I've actually got a much bigger concept of what the impact of the brand is internally rather than externally, because we don't have the money to spend on brand. You know, Jetstar spent $60 million in 3 months to launch. Coca-Cola's mother, they spent $30 million in 6 months to launch the brand. We don't have stuff like that. And it's not that the external public doesn't necessarily identify with the brand of a not-for-profit. They identify with the cause of that. And that's what our staff identify with. It's the mission. So that's what we need to focus on. And yes, it is important because it is our way of saying we're noticed, we're different. And so when we approach branding, we need to approach it with that same thing. How is it different to other people? How is it different to our staff? What's important in that? And it's not about fear. It's about saying, well, this is another tool to engage. It's another tool to generate questions. That's a whole other session.
Brilliant. Well, that brings us to a wrap. Thank you. That's been a fantastic webinar. So much information, and that I know that we'll all take into our organisations. And yeah, just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Gerard, once again. We will share the slides with everybody post-event, and of course we have been recording this webinar as well. Also, do check out our Grow upcoming events on our website. I'll email you through that link if you haven't seen them before. We've got other webinars coming up, and as well as face-to-face workshops planned for this year. So, which of course will be going ahead as we move through our levels. All good. Well, thanks again, people. Gerard, anything you'd like to sort of finish off by?
I'm really happy if people want to reach out via email or connect through LinkedIn and then email questions, etc., to follow through, or through Grow. I'm very happy to sort of just respond to people. If you go away and you're cogitating a few more things, more than happy to answer questions for you.
That's wonderful. Great stuff. All right. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day. Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.